Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Uh-oh. So you heard the lady say, so you're now being recorded, so be careful what you say.
Yeah.
Everything will be here for posterity, and you don't want to say. So just to repeat briefly, page 132, we're starting about holiness, defining holiness. The Hebrew word for holiness is kedusha.
Yeah.
This is one of several of the most important theological and religious concepts in Judaism, along with some others, such as chosen people. And presumably, we're all interested, or we need to get interested in this. There was just an article yesterday. You may have seen that Jewish religious school attendance in the last little over a decade has dropped almost 50%. So that parents apparently they don't even know what these concepts are. And so for them, religious school is just a rite of passage, and it's a rite of passage that you can dispense with. So unless we can somehow communicate the importance of these religious concepts to the younger generation, we're clearly failing in that respect. That does not mean that we have to have one idea about what holiness is. What I think is holy is not what Cy thinks holy. And what Cy thinks is holy is not what Evelyn thinks is holy. So there's,
How do you know?
So we have the right and indeed the responsibility to engage in it on our own and decide, what we feel about these things. But hopefully what we argue is based upon some rational basis. We can quote some texts. We can say, this is why I think this and this and this. And I'll say, Evelyn, but you're misquoting such a text. And she said, no, I'm not. And Maimonides agrees with me. And you can have an intelligent argument based on actual information rather than, I just think that way. Okay, opening comments, holiness, anything, and then we'll get into the text on page 132. And we want to welcome Lori. I don't know if this is your first time, but your first time in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And everybody else we know from many months. And so opening comments about holiness.
I found it very interesting on the bottom of page 132 and continuing on page 133, all of these aspects of doing good and what we should not do. And what it basically tells us that human nature is inclined to do precisely that. And therefore, God created us in his image. And this I can find it very difficult to accept, because what image? The image physically, the image ethically, morally. Obviously, he created a flawed creation. If these have to be written down and say, thou shalt not do all of these things, dealing dishonestly or worshiping other gods, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm finding it very interesting that we have to be told how we should be moral, when basically, if God created us in his image, we shouldn't have these flaws. And that I find very difficult to reconcile with the concept of an omnipotent and omniscient God. It's theologically, it confuses me.
Evelyn, you're hitting on some very sensitive points here. If Marcia wasn't here, I would be more explicit, but I'm afraid she'll understand what I'm saying too much.
I'm going to report you to the higher authorities.
But if you look at that book, that British woman, God and Anatomy, she argues, reasonably persuasively, that when the Torah talks about God creating people in his image, that was originally meant in a literal way, that God had an image, had a body, and we were to be created in God's image, literally, in terms of our noses and our feet and so forth. And obviously later rabbinic authorities, especially Maimonides, but many others, I mean, pretty much everybody had to do some very fast backtracking and say, no, the Torah didn't mean it that way. It meant it in a symbolic, metaphorical manner only, which is how we would accept it today. But they couldn't admit that that was how it was originally intended, because then you're basically admitting that all of Judaism had, basically not just changed, but flipped 180 degrees from a God that was extremely corporeal to a God that was completely incorporeal. And so that's sort of I think you touched on that in a couple of ways. But none of that would affect how if God is presumably holy, then whether God actually has a body or doesn't, we can copy this idea of holiness, and we're going to try to define holiness, but presumably holiness is good, being good to people when nobody's watching, right? So, you want to try to actually have a good heart, that you want to help people even when you don't get credit for it, right? So if there's a newspaper there with a photographer and I can help somebody across the street and they'll take my picture and I'll be on the front page, I'm much more likely to do that than if nobody's around, right? And nobody's going to care, nobody's going to notice. But the person who's holy is going to want to help that person even when there's no cameras there. And that, with politicians, I guess maybe we shouldn't even talk about politicians, because it makes our hair on the back of our necks stand up just to hear the word politician. But there's politicians presumably who are idealistic and really want to help people. And then there's unfortunately many politicians that we know are craven and, just the opposite. And, the only thing they do is what's, going to make them popular and rich. So that's not holy, right? So Evelyn, back to you. Did I address some of your issues?
I think you skirted it, to be perfectly honest.
In my defense, I'm trying to avoid giving Marcia anything too specific that she can use later. So, Marcia.
But to the conversation between the two of you, when you talk about the corporeal image of God, when you talk about sacrificing animals, and it's about the smell is supposed to please God. Well, God wouldn't be pleased if he didn't have a nose. So then you get back to that image of God as a being, as a anatomical being. And our minds don't at this point, because we've evolved, I think, over the years in our concepts, can't accept that. But back then, I guess it really was being accepted, in the eyes of God. And, there's that expression, does God have eyes, in that matter, So we're seeing God one way, more philosophically rather than substantively.
Lori put in a comment saying, for the record, she feels that God is corporeal today. And so that goes against my favorite philosopher, Maimonides.
Look at that.
Yeah.
So we're gonna try to arrange a debate next week between Maimonides and Lori. Is God corporeal? And we'll see who wins.
So Maimonides was how many years later than when these first Torah writings appeared?
Maybe 1500.
But I figured.
So. But Maimonides is a medieval Jewish philosopher, and for him, God was incorporeal. But in his Guide to the Perplexed, one of the issues so there was a small elite among the Jews that really studied stuff, and they really thought about problems, right? So medieval Judaism, you didn't have the internet, you had a limited number of books, but the real intellectuals, from the books they had and the things they'd learned, there were some obvious glaring contradictions. Now, today we're used to contradictions, right? So if Marcia is going to present some point a 12-page list of contradictions that I have made over the past few years, and she'll say, our rabbi on July 12th said this, and on November 19th, he said the exact opposite. And then the following March, he said a third thing. And how can one rabbi hold all these views? And, she'll make a big speech like that, and I'll just shrug and say, yes, I'm guilty. I said all those things. They're contradictory. So what? But in medieval Judaism, you couldn't do that. You had to say, Judaism's perfect, Judaism's consistent, and Maimonides felt Judaism's rational. And holiness is based upon a perfect conception of God as incorporeal. Therefore, he had to explain away all these references in the Torah to God stretching out his arm, God seeing, God talking, God, all of this stuff had to be explained away. And Maimonides in Arabic tries to do that, very, well. But now, did Maimonides know more than he was letting on? Of course. And in the introduction of the Guide to Perplex, he says that. He says, I'm going to deliberately contradict myself. And the really smart people will understand what I'm really trying to say, but I can't say it because I'm afraid it will demoralize the average Jew who will hear about this book. And they'll say, even Maimonides doesn't believe in Judaism. Let's convert to some other religion. So he didn't want to do that, so he hid his secret beliefs. And I do that too. In my books, I kind of buried some of my secret beliefs. I don't know, maybe it was influenced by Maimonides. Maybe I didn't want to sound as pessimistic as I am. So I did the same thing. Other comments? If not, we'll start. Riva, Minya, Shirley, Steve. Okay. Sai, did you want to say something? I think I missed
I
your
wanted to say, to me, the fact of being holy is a pretty individual thing. And it bothers me a little bit that at least from our reading, that I can't be holy in my own way unless I believe in God. And this is a problem I'm having.
Okay, so this is from the opposite end of the spectrum from what Evelyn's suggesting. I don't think that we're saying that. I think the assumption here in text is that this type of holiness emanates from God. So this is the discussion here. Where does it say that, does Harvey Field say that you can't be holy without God? I don't think he says that, but the whole discussion here is based upon God. So I don't think he's precluding any other type of holiness. I just don't think it's part of the discussion. So I'm sorry if Harvey unintentionally offended you, Sai, but he didn't mean to. He's just he's focusing on the topic at hand, which is from Leviticus. Definitely in the book of Leviticus, holiness is based upon some interaction or copying of God. But that is not to say you can't be holy without God, or that you can't be ethical without God, or any of these things. But that's not really the focus of synagogue Judaism in general. Although, we always want to have that option out there for the outliers who, are like Sai.
Was that
and
what
maybe
the
Bernie.
ethical, Rabbi, was that what the ethical culturists were years ago? I used to hear of a group like that. And I don't think they had affiliation with any religious institution. They simply said, these are the things you have to do in order to be a good, holy person.
That's a fascinating, and you know who founded ethical culture?
No, I don't.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Rabbi-
yes. Yeah,
Um,
correct.
Also,
So,
Who was that?
yes,
Who was it?
Reva, say again.
a rabbi originated ethical culture. I just want to say one more thing about that, and that is the motto for ethical culture is deed, not creed. So the bottom line for ethical culture is how you behave, not what you believe.
So ethical culture is a fascinating thing. Rabbi Samuel Adler was rabbi of Temple Manuel in New York, the big temple, and his son's name was Felix. And this is before Hebrew Union College. This is in the 1860s. And so people who want to become rabbis had to go to Germany. So Felix went to Germany and he studied to become a Reform rabbi, and he came back and he gave a sermon, and they were going to hire him at Emmanuel to work with his father and then take over. But the sermon was so extreme and broke with Reform norms in terms of belief in God and things like that, that it created a problem, and they refused to appoint him. So Adler said, but people in Emmanuel respected him, and they went to him and they said, you can't be Rabbi Emmanuel because you're not, religious enough, but we like what you're saying, we'll fund you. So Felix set up the Society for Ethical Culture, which was, as it sounds, a culture to be ethical. No Jewish stuff, no religious stuff. So he took away all the religion, all the ethnicity, just be good people. And they set up a very fancy private school, and they became like their own group. And so it was for German Jews who wanted to leave Judaism, basically, but didn't want to become Christians. And they had a Sunday meeting where they didn't have any ritual, no praying to God or anything, but they would talk about ethics, and Felix Adler would give a big speech, which was parallel to what the Reform synagogues were doing at the time, where they'd have a Sunday service and the rabbis would give a long speech, like 45 minutes. You can't get away with that today. Much to my disappointment. And it's still going a little bit, ethical culture. Okay. Riva, and then Minya.
Yeah, just one further comment. The issue of whether ethical culture was a religion at all has been in the courts. Because the ethical culture people say that they don't have a view on whether there is or isn't a God. What people in their congregation believe is their own business. But I believe it was the state of Texas. There was an issue of an ethical culture organization that was trying to hang on to their tax exempt status. And it was based on whether they were a religion or not. And I believe the ethical culture group won that decision, and they continued to have tax exempt status. In other words, in the view of the state, they were considered a religion.
That's interesting.
And I think that makes sense, because they're kind of like a religion, but they're just not a religion that stresses, beliefs. So, why, we have a wide variety of types of religions, and you could argue that Reform Judaism is quickly moving in that direction as well, where beliefs don't matter, Okay, who's next? Minya.
I just want to go back to holy for a minute. I don't understand why, if you don't believe in God, where does holy fit in? To me, holy has to do with God. If you're not, you don't believe in God, and you're a wonderful person, and you do everything that's good for humanity, that doesn't make you holy. That's
What does it make you?
A very good person.
Well, I guess here we have to. This is the purpose of today. Is we hopefully will come away today with a better idea of how we could define holiness. So if holiness is intrinsically linked to God, then Minya is correct. If it's not, then Sai can say that he's holy. Otherwise, the quote unquote secularists would have to come up with another term. So, but it's open to definitions. But Minya's making the of course, we're not really talking about the word holiness. We're talking about the word kedusha in Hebrew,
Right.
presumably. And then we'd have to ask, well, is it the kedusha as defined in the Torah? Is it the kedusha as defined in modern Jewish thought? So there's a lot of things you have to define. And Minya could easily say, from her point of view, kedusha is connected to God, and that, as explained in the book of Leviticus, and that a good person who doesn't believe in God or doesn't believe in the Torah in some sense can be something else, but shouldn't use the word kedusha because that doesn't fit the circumstances. So Sai can come up with a new term where he says, I am aspiring to be something else that's similar to kedusha, but is a little bit different based on the fact that it is different. It has different premises. So that's a possibility. I didn't want to close off the discussion before we even started. So other comments?
Yes, I want to add something to what I said. I knew someone in New York who was supposedly a very holy person because he did everything that the Torah told him to do, except that he was a miserable, I won't say SOB, but that's what he was. And he was not good to people. So he would not be a holy person to me, because if you're going to be a holy person, that means you have to do good. You have to consider other people. And he was miserable, but he would be considered holy because he did everything the Torah told him to do.
But he didn't do everything.
Well, he didn't do the good things. He only did things to make himself self-satisfied.
Well, that's nothing. Then he wouldn't. Then that wouldn't even come close because it all depends how we define kedusha. But it would seem somebody holy is going to want to be nice to people, very nice to people. And then the question is, if somebody's nasty to you, do you have to be nice to them to have kedusha? So I guess I'm not interested in kedusha. If people are nasty to me, I don't want to be nice to them. I just either want to avoid them or retaliate or something. But so we have to define what behavior is required of somebody to achieve kedusha. But clearly, somebody who's not nice to anybody, I mean, how would they even? I mean, that's the if you look at the Ten Commandments, the first 5 are for God and the second 5 are about people. So if you can't be nice to people, respect people, and help people, then you're clearly not fitting into that. So a person who just does the ritual commandments, but not the human commandments, this is the sort of shell of Jewish observance that is, I think, condemned by everyone. Okay, we'll start the reading, page 132.
Rabbi, Riva's got her hand up.
Okay, Riva.
Yeah, this was with reference to what Minya was saying a few minutes ago. Jumping ahead substantially, page 133, the part of the box on the right-hand side says, the idea of holiness implies that what we do and what we make of our lives matters not only to us as individuals, not only to society, but to the entire cosmos. The divine purpose runs through all existence. And I think that's sort of consistent with what people say, that they want to leave the world better than it was when they arrived. And that's consistent with what Minya has been saying, that it's essential how you behave as a human being towards the rest of the world. Be holy. And that's the position that's stressed in that particular box, as the purpose of your life must be holy. I think there's
No
also,
question.
I can't remember the word for it. Is it kavanah or something? It's your intent. Is
Yeah,
that-
covenant. Well, that's another question then. To be holy, to have kedusha, you have to have kavanah. So if someone's just nice because they're nice, so if Lorraine sits down and says, I don't think about being nice, I'm just nice, does that count in the same way as if Bernie sits down and says, I'm going to really try to be nice? Do you have to have kavanah in order to, meet the criteria for holiness by being nice?
So,
And you could argue both ways. You could argue that no, the person that just is nice without trying, without thinking about it, is actually holier than the person that has to try. Or you could argue the other way, the person that tries, it's but sure, the issue of whether you need kavanah in anything in Judaism is a running issue in the Talmud. Sai and then Marcia.
It's hard for me to accept the fact that if you are holy, you should necessarily be good. Because if you go back in history, there were all sorts of religions where people were holy, using the word, but they were not good people. Religions where people were killed, people were thrown into fires to appease God, things like that. And those were not necessarily good things, but they were holy things. So to me, holiness is nothing more than your relationship to what you believe in your religion. And it has nothing to do with being good. It's how you relate to the religion, how much you put into the religion, how religious you really are. And we know, at least I know, some people who are very, very Orthodox, and as Minna pointed out, not nice people, but they're very, very,
Observant.
religious and God-fearing. So what?
So I guess there is a traditional view that Sai and Minya are advocating for, it seems, that holiness is a narrower construction that involves how much you're dedicated to Jewish ritual only. Obviously, that's not the way that I would explain it if I was doing a High Holy Day sermon, but I am not going to deny that in the past that maybe certain Jewish groups defined it in that way. Lori, any comments at this point before we start reading?
Sure.
Or Marcia?
You really
Okay,
want-
Lori.
Lori,
you
go
really want
first.
to Get me started already? Okay, so in the book of Exodus, I'm going to go back to Exodus. I'm going to touch a couple of verses just real quickly. Moses is talking to God, and he says, if thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. Carry us not up hence. For wherein now shall it be known that I have found grace in thy sight, I and thy people, is it not in that thou goest with us? So Israel's distinctiveness is largely tied to its nearness to God. Okay? That being said, these rules and these things that we're learning in Leviticus, these laws of purity, these help us to be clean. And this is a way that we can be close to God. So we have Psalm 24. It says, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord, who may stand in his holy place, he who has clean hands and a pure heart. Okay.
So they said that the expression is cleanliness is next to godliness.
That could be exactly where that comes from. So moving forward, these laws of purity, in the end, God eventually says to us, do these things, ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. So these are all ways and observances, like we were talking about in the last class I was at, when we were talking about keeping kosher. It's like, yes, these observances may and can bring you closer to God. But these are ways to be clean, to be pure, to not eat things that are detestable, ways to be holy. These are ways that God said, ye shall be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. So I can argue that these observances are ways in which we can be clean and avoid being unclean, and they can help us to stand before God. So holiness is tied in, it's part of this distinctiveness that we have, and this is the way that we're closer to God. And so I'm kind of getting off track here, Rabbi, if you can kind of reel me back in with your question one more time so I can make my point. I'm sorry.
I guess
Let me ask Seymour. Seymour, what was your problem with this?
It's Sai, he calls himself.
Sai.
Sai, what was your problem with this? The idea of holiness? Can you repeat it?
It wasn't a problem. It's just that I don't accept holiness as necessarily being goodness, if you will. The two have, one thing has nothing to do with the other.
Okay, and you were talking about the Orthodox, right? How they do a lot of things. Was that what you had said?
Oh, I just said that as an example, yes.
Okay, so outward rites definitely help to constitute holiness, right? When you're practicing these things that God has told you to do, okay, I'm back on track, that God has told you to do, then you're by definition being holy, right? You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And these are the things that keep you clean and pure. And that's related to holiness. So I understand where you're coming from in that sense, but I definitely feel like holiness as an outward rite is definitely different as holiness as like a personal attribute. So I understand what you're saying, but can you define for me?
Well, so then you admit that you could be religiously holy and not be a nice person. That's what you're saying.
My rabbi will tell you that there are certainly people out there who are pious that are really not nice people, or jerks, he might even say. So, I mean, I don't think that everybody who practices outward rites is always acting in a holy way. I think people can be dismissive to certain groups, right? So, and again, I don't think that's a holy way of being. You know, when you're talking about groups of people that don't accept other groups of people, I don't find that holy. I think that we're supposed to love one another and find the common things we have in common, not the things that we have apart. But that being said, I mean, I definitely feel like this is a path. These laws that we're learning in Leviticus are ways that we can observe what God is teaching us to do. These rules we're supposed to follow, which can bring us closer to God. Being nearer to God is tied into our distinctiveness, but I definitely feel like it's not just necessarily outward rites that determine holiness. Holiness is also a way of being. We also are commanded to do what is right and good.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Bernie, and then we're going to start.
I think that a lot of the discussion here is confusing holiness being subjective or objective. Just because someone calls himself holy doesn't make him holy, whether he's a good or a bad person. It has to be by consensus of the community rather than the individual. Like Torquemada, I'm sure considered himself a holy person, but I certainly don't.
Right. So just because somebody considers themselves holy, you know, but we have to have our own definition. So yes, the inquisitors in the Inquisition presumably actually believe, most of them probably believe they were doing God's work and therefore that was holy, but what they were doing was awful from our perspective. Okay, page 132. Who'd like to read?
Nobody wants to.
Nobody's volunteering. You want me to
I'll
read?
read if
I'll
you
read.
Oh, you want to
Okay,
read, Evelyn?
Okay.
Page 132, top left corner, Perek Bet, defining holiness in Jewish tradition.
Parshat Kedoshim begins with God's commandment to the Jewish people. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. Many Torah interpreters ask what such a commandment means. Does it have to do with a special state of ritual purity? Since it is stated in the midst of a description of rituals associated with ancient sanctuary, can it have to do with being qualified to enter the sanctuary? Is the commandment to be holy possible or practical? Is it realistic to expect a human being to be holy as God is holy? Three of the oldest interpretations of the commandment to be holy provide some valuable answers to such questions. Rabbi Hiya, who lived in Israel during the 3rd century, stresses that Moses was told to present the commandment, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy," to the whole Israelite community. The commandment was not given to a few pious priests or individuals, but rather to the entire community. Achieving the state of holiness, therefore, is not something done by one person or a small group of persons, but rather by the whole people.
Okay, stop for a minute, Evelyn. Stop for a minute. So what Harvey Fields is saying here is that this is not something that Cy or Marcia or Bernie can do. It's something that we do as a group. Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly?
It seems to be, it has to be a collective project, shall we say.
So how effective we are as a community, as a congregation, is whether we're holy or not. It's not a question of what Marcia's like or what Reva's like. It's a question of how we work together. And that's in some ways harder. Cy.
Well, on that basis, and I agree with you, but can we really be holy? When you're asking everybody in the group to meet certain standards.
Well, and how we work together as a group, which, unfortunately is usually not so good. I mean, if you study organizational psychology, you see that people in organizations, whether they're a synagogue or a business or a HOA, they tend to fight with each other and behave not nice. I mean, so we could have some very saintly people and very sweet people helping others across the street against red lights, and it won't matter because, as a community, we're not meeting this standard. So I don't know. It would be easier if you or I or anyone could just on their own aspire to this, but that's not what he's suggesting. Okay, Evelyn, back to you.
Okay, Rabbi Levi, who taught with Rabbi Hiya, emphasizes that the commandment to be holy and the section of the Torah following it were presented directly to the people because the 10 commandments are contained in it. Rabbi Levi may be hinting that the way to holiness is through observance of all the commandments listed in this section of the Torah. Seeing a parallel between the contents of the 10 commandments given to Moses on Mount Sinai and the mitzvot presented in these chapters of Leviticus, Levi concludes that God not only commanded the people to be holy, but stressed the particular moral way of life that would demonstrate that they were a distinct people. The Sifra, continue?
Yeah.
Sifra, a 4th century commentary on Leviticus, echoes Rabbi Levi's view. It interprets the word Kedoshim Tehiyu, you shall be holy, as Perushim Teheyu, you shall be separate. Some scholars say this is a reference to the Pharisees, who were known by the Hebrew name Perushim, and who taught that Jews achieved holiness or special status of honor by God if they carefully observed all the commandments.
And this is where Minya and a few others got that idea that if people are meticulous in their observance of the ritual commandments, they might be seen as kadosh, even if they're not particularly nice.
Okay. Other interpreters argue that the authors of Sifra meant to emphasize the unique responsibility of Jews to become a kingdom of priests and Goy Kodesh, or holy nation. They believed that by living a Jewish life through carrying out the commandments of Torah, Jews were to be different from other nations, religions, and peoples. By interpreting the word Kedoshim as Perushim, the Sifra authors contend that the words be holy mean be different, unique, separate from the ways of others, be distinct in your moral and ritual way of life. Does this mean that Jews are to withdraw from the societies in which they live, or from contact with people of other religions and national origins? Most modern philosopher Martin Buber says no. He writes, Israel must, in imitating God by being a holy nation, similarly not withdraw from the world of the nations, but rather radiate a positive influence on them through every aspect of Jewish living. For Buber, being kadosh, or different, unique, does not mean retreating from contact with other religions and national groups. Instead, it is a special goal and responsibility. It means that the Jewish people must achieve an ethical and spiritual excellence that can enrich and influence all other peoples.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. So as you see, the discussion is moving away from my opening comments that Kedusha is really primarily about being nice. And it's moving toward the collective responsibilities of Jewish people to be observant. So that's the problem I have. Some comments about these last couple of paragraphs, and maybe Martin Buber in particular. Riva, Minya, Riva.
Yeah, I'll take a stab. It seems to me, based on what was just read, that we're talking about two value systems. One is the moral or ethical, and the second one is the ritual or spiritual. And I think what we're seeing here is a debate in terms of which takes precedence, or how to, and it doesn't even address the issue of pretty much of combining the two. But in one sense, we're talking about if you behave well as a human being and treat other people well, is that sufficient? Or if you do your rituals really, really well, is that sufficient? And my take on it is that no, if you're deficient in either area, you're not a good Jew. But I would weight the scales more towards moral and ethical over ritual. And that's, I think, within this group and within over periods of time within the Jewish religion and within the various Jewish groups, there's an enormous difference in terms of where they put the emphasis. Do they put it on moral versus ritual, or ethical versus spiritual? And we divide on that. And I think one of the examples that has been given of somebody who's Orthodox and, does kashrut perfectly, does that make a good Jew? No, in my view, it does not. If a person behaves badly to other people, that kicks them out.
So you agree with me?
I'm not sure.
Minya, Marsha, Lori, Lorraine, Shirley. Yes, Minya.
I take this as meaning that the standards are so much higher for Jewish people that we have very high standards that make us stand out from everyone else. And it's our responsibility to teach other people the things that make us stand out. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Did that make
that's
sense?
definitely, Bernie.
Minya's comment to me is awfully close to the chosen people, which has always bothered me. Why should we be chosen? And I think that that concept is chutzpahdik.
Mhm.
What makes us
Well, yeah,
better than everybody else?
not better, but that God chose us.
Well, I'm sure that other religions believe that God chose them too.
Not so much. Like Christianity sees itself as a universal religion. God didn't choose a specific group called the Christians. God, according to Christianity, wants everyone to accept Jesus, and then you're saved. So it's not God choosing you, it's you choosing God. In Judaism, there's more this concept of the chosen people. I don't think the Christians really have that. I don't know that the Muslims have that, and I don't know about Eastern religions, but no, I think I don't know if I'm sure it's not unique, but I don't think it's standard for most religions. No.
Certainly every religion believes that God favors them rather than all the other religions.
Yes, but I think like Christianity it sort of expects everyone should become Christian by force if necessary in certain periods. So they don't see themselves as a chosen group. They see themselves as part of what should be everyone. So I think that's quite different.
Okay, I'll accept that.
So you can see why some groups would be very resentful at the Jews who are, like you said, you put it in a very gentle way, the chutzpahdik, but the Nazis used that in their propaganda and said, these people have incredible, they put it in much harsher terms, as one of their reasons for hating the Jews. So now those who defend the concept, this is of course a little bit of a different topic than what we're on right now, but it's an important one. And Mordecai Kaplan, as I said earlier, said no, we should get rid of that concept. But Reform Judaism did not, and in fact emphasized it quite heavily because they felt that Rabbi David Einhorn, who was a Reform rabbi in Baltimore just before the Civil War, and he had to flee Baltimore in the middle of the night so that he wouldn't get lynched. And because he was openly anti-slavery, and he said that being the chosen people, we have certain ethical obligations, and we should go all over the world and and show people, serve by example, not to try to convert everyone to Judaism, but to serve as an example in all places to what ethical demands include. So you could phrase it in a positive way, not that we think we're quote unquote better, but rather that we feel we are trying to set the standard for high and appropriate behavior. I don't know, does any of that make it more palatable to you, Bernie?
I still think there's a little bit of chutzpah in that.
Well, there's no question. But it is part of the unique nature of Jewish theology that it's hard to take it out. Anyone else? Marcia.
Can you say that God chose the Jews, but in accepting the Ten Commandments, the Jews chose God? So it's more of a symbiotic relationship.
and depends which midrash you go with. There's the famous midrash where God holds Mount Sinai over the heads of the whole Israelites,
Right.
and he says, "Do you accept the Ten Commandments? Do you accept the Torah? And if not, I'll drop this mountain on all of you." So that's, in that way, in that midrash, the sense is that it wasn't so completely and absolutely voluntary.
Or
Only
else.
80%. It depends how you feel about a mountain being dropped on your head.
Right.
Riva? Sai? Lori?
Well, I mean, I definitely, somebody had mentioned, that they know people who keep kosher, but they're not necessarily nice people or holy people, maybe. Mitzvah are the ways which we fulfill our duties to God and our duties to man. So it's hard to do all of them at once, but that is definitely the goal, right? Is to live a Torah life. So that being said, when I see somebody who is keeping kosher and maybe they're speaking about a group of people that they don't agree with, I don't think I necessarily cast them out entirely and say, well, that just can't be holy, that just can't be right, because they don't have both the components working at the same time. I definitely think it's a path. And if we keep on that path, then it leads, like one commandment leads to another commandment. The practice of Torah, the studying of Torah, it leads us to the next step to become that better person. It's a journey. It's a journey. It's a destination for sure. But I think it's a process of getting there. We're created in the image of God. We're not created as God. He didn't say, I created you as me. He created us in his image. So I definitely feel like we have to be patient too. I think that's really important to think about in this conversation. The Talmud tells us the soul is a part of God, which is placed into physical existence. So that being said, if God is holy, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. There is holiness placed within us. And so there is this saying that man is not only to worship God, but to imitate him. By his deeds, he must reveal the divine that is implanted in him and make manifest by the purity of his righteousness and of his actions that he is of God. So, so we have the plan, we have the path, we have the holiness. It's embedded in each of us. It's part of our soul. If we're taking into consideration all these things that we're being taught or that I'm talking of now, but necessarily doing them all at the same time, I think that's the project. Like that's the journey we're on together. And doing it collectively, we're saying this is who we are. When we do it independently, this is who I am. But collectively, obviously, would be a great culmination of our efforts. Collective identity.
Now, it's possible that much of this is hinted at, that there's a connection with what they call the holiness code, and a paragraph or two down that we'll read in a moment, that's chapter 17 to 26 of the book of Leviticus. So that earlier was a separate text that was put into Leviticus, if that makes sense. And in the Torah, in the 5 books, there's 3 or 4 of these sections that are considered to have been separate originally and were incorporated into larger books. And the holiness code, as it sounds, revolves around this question: what makes people holy? Okay, back to you, Evelyn. Marcia and
Well,
Sai, and then back.
I'll be quick. I think the problem is with all the talk of goodness and holiness, we're flying in the face of human nature and free will and people doing what they want to do without thinking about how it affects people around them, if you will, which is the whole essence of the being good, is how you're affecting everyone around you. So when when people's egos start taking over their actions, then you wind up with bad people. And we're not going to be able to resolve that around the Bible. I mean, it's a real effort for some people to not be bad, you know. Their inclinations, they just, either they haven't been taught properly, or they just tend to not want to obey the laws of God. Yeah, I don't know how to express it, but what I know what I'm trying to say is you're fighting free will when, you know, a lot of times, you know.
Okay.
Sai has a question for me.
Sai and then Evelyn.
I was going to ask you, Rabbi, are you aware of anybody using artificial intelligence in research on the Bible?
Oh yeah, well that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but that's a huge.
Well, that could open up a lot of avenues.
Yes, and it's that has been used. Computers and artificial intelligence been used for many years, and in the coming years, it's going to be used much more. Of course, in terms of our discussion here, artificial intelligence can also begin to have to deal with issues of holiness in their personal behavior. As you have artificial intelligence is starting to be like a person, like a very smart person. They don't have a body really, like perhaps God, but other than that, they can think and they can analyze and they can make decisions, make evaluations, judgments. And so, you know, just like God, we may fear them or we may love them. And there is a theory that part of the decline of God and religion in the Western world is due to the prevalence of computers and cell phones. That, you know, in the old days we would turn to God and ask God for help. Now we turn to our cell phone. And so the cell phone has, in a sense, or the artificial intelligence or the computer or whatever you want to call it, has become our God. And so yeah, but this is a topic that needs a full treatment separately. You know, the impact of artificial intelligence upon religion and Judaism and the relation between two. I mean, you could have a whole series on that. That'd be very good. Marcia and okay, then back Evelyn.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Marcia has said apropos of free will. Human beings are inclined to be selfish. I think it is a trait for survival. And so if one sees an advantage in any way of grabbing an opportunity to promote oneself or to help oneself in some way or to take advantage of someone else, it is human nature to want to do it. If someone sees an opportunity to shoplift, they're going to do it. If someone in business sees an opportunity to make a lot of money by literally taking advantage of someone else, they're going to do it. We have proof of it every day in the news. And so the fact that these edicts have been given to us proves that human beings are basically like any other animal. The desire to survive is primary, and survive is the name of the game, no matter how. And so it's fine when you do it for the benefit of the general good. But if one takes advantage and so puts the rest of society at a disadvantage, then I think it becomes dangerous. Therefore, you have all of these edicts, don't do this and don't do that, because it is to the detriment of the general group as such. And this is why it is in the Bible. And again, I still reiterate, it is against human nature, and human nature is constantly battling with this. It's a constant struggle to follow these rules, because in some cases it is contrary to what the individual feels will be detrimental to his own well-being or survival.
Remember that this is much more true in the modern times than it was in medieval times, where you had small communities closely controlled by religious leaders and no economic options. So Evelyn, you would have lived in a little Jewish area in Germany, let's say, with, I don't know, 45 Jews and surrounded by Christians, and there was nowhere to go. So you had to follow what the rabbis told you to do, or else.
Right.
Today, we have far more options, and everything Evelyn said is very, very true. Okay, Evelyn, back to you to read.
Okay, where was I? The list.
Yeah, what is the source of that positive influence?
Wait a minute. Am I
Page 132, right-hand side, the third paragraph from the bottom, little paragraph.
the list? Yeah. No, I was surveying, wasn't it? Surveying the. Was that it?
Yes, I
I
guess.
was
Yeah,
thinking-
surveying the commandments clustered around the words, "Be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, I am holy," provides a significant answer. Taken together, they add up to a definition of holiness in Jewish tradition. Nearly every aspect of Jewish living is noted. Chapters 17 to 26 of Leviticus, which have become known to biblical scholars as, quote, the holiness code, unquote, contains commandments that deal not only with the Sabbath, the festivals, and the different sacrifices to be offered at the sanctuary, but also include commandments regulating the moral life of the Jewish community. The list of ethical commandments encompasses nearly every aspect of human relationship. According to these commandments, Jewish morality forbids exposure of nakedness, incest, infidelity by husband or wife, idolatry or the worship of other gods, declaring false oaths, stealing, dealing deceitfully or falsely, defrauding another, retaining a worker's wage overnight, insulting the deaf, misleading the blind, rendering unfair decisions, favoring the poor in a dispute, showing partiality to the rich in a dispute, dealing dishonestly in business, profiting by taking advantage of others' misfortune, carrying grudges, spreading hatred, taking vengeance, practicing divination, soothsaying, or turning to ghosts and spirits. On the positive side, Jewish ethics command reverence for parents, leaving the corners of the field and some of the fruit of the vineyard for the poor and stranger, judging all people fairly, warning others who are about to commit a wrongdoing, and loving others as you love yourself.
Okay.
Continue.
What do you think? No, let's stop there. Does this start to give us a definition of holiness, and is this acceptable?
The moral conduct.
Moral conduct, okay. So you can't cheat people, for example, whether you can't favor the poor just because they're poor, and you can't favor the rich just because they're rich. If there's a legal dispute and you're the judge, you have to judge it fairly. Who cheated who and how do you fix it? So you have to be fair. You have to be you can't hold money that you owe to somebody, for a long time or overnight, even, because they did the work and they need the money to feed their family. You have to be considerate. Is this holy? Is this moving in the right direction, Riva?
Yeah, I think that's what I mentioned earlier. That's stressing the importance of the moral and the ethical, separate from the ritual and the spiritual. and I think we're talking about two spectrums. One is, a moral ethical spectrum, and the other one is a ritual spiritual spectrum. And so we're talking about each of these. And in this last reading, the emphasis is on the moral and ethical, how we treat one another. And then with the ritual and spiritual, it's more our relationship with God. So one is primarily our relationship with other human beings, and I think probably the earth, our environment. And then second one is ritual and spiritual, our interactions with our behavior with reference to God. So I think
But it does list the don't consult with ghosts is listed here.
Well, there might be some, I'm not sure the word right now, but sort of mislabeling in some cases.
But it does have the activities of the social action committee here, leaving the corners of the field and some of the fruit of the vineyard for the poor and the stranger. In today's world, we collect tin cans filled with these things, and that, which Steve Siegel, as you know, is involved in very much, and then bring it over to the West Valley Food Pantry to give out to needy people. So it's not literally doing what's here, but it's doing something that's basically the equivalent. So I think, and we went over there and you saw that they run a very good show. They know how to do it, and they know how to give people who are legitimately in need and can benefit from this. And, it was definitely, something that helps people who need to be helped. And so that's good. But I still don't understand why I can't consult with a ghost once in a while. That Casper guy was pretty friendly.
That's part of it. I think what they mean in there is likened to adultery, right? Because you should be turning to God for your answers. You shouldn't be turning to a sorcerer or a crystal ball or a piece of wood, or you're not supposed to make idols. So I think maybe that might be encompass that.
But when I was rejected by that beautiful woman several years ago, I went to that lady in New Orleans, and she put the little pins in the doll. And that I thought that was a perfectly legitimate thing to do. That's a joke. It's a joke. Oh, nobody's laughing.
You have
But,
to say it's a joke.
Yeah, when you have to say it's a joke, it's not funny. But you can see here, this was written a long time ago, so it does mix in a few things that we might not include today. But it's insulting the deaf. So today, my dog walker, Christine, is deaf, and we communicate just fine with text messaging. When she comes over to take the dogs, she talks to me, and I talk to her. She can understand me. I can understand what she's saying partially. We're not talking about abstract concepts in philosophy. So she's saying, "Oh, this dog went to the bathroom. This one didn't. This one, things like that, where it's pretty easy to figure out." But the reason it's probably here is that in the old days, it would be very easy to insult the deaf because they couldn't hear. So they're basically at a big disadvantage. So if I want to insult Bernie, he'll hear what I say, and he's a tough guy, and he can insult me back. So maybe that's nice, but at least it's being fair. We're on a level playing surface here. But if Bernie couldn't hear me, then my insulting him wouldn't be fair. So there's a certain sense of fairness in terms of holiness. So then what's the difference between holiness as described here and just being a mensch, a good person? All right, Bernie, don't insult me.
I don't want to answer that question, but what I don't see here is any reference to how you interact with God. And it set me wondering whether I forget the name of it, but the document that in those days, the UAHC created in Pittsburgh in the late 1800s. Do they still believe that, or have they changed that philosophy of being ethical is more important than being spiritual?
Hey,
Yeah, there was the
Oh.
platform at Pittsburgh 1885, and then it was replaced by the Columbus platform in 1936, which was replaced by the San Francisco Statement in 1975, and then finally another Pittsburgh platform of 1999. And so each one changed things a little bit. I wrote an article comparing them, but not specifically about, but the Pittsburgh platform of 1885, as you probably are aware, emphasized that moral behavior was more important than ritual behavior.
And as I said, I don't see anything here that says you have to interact with God or be like God. This is all ethical and moral stuff.
Is that good or bad in your view?
My view, it's great.
Okay, so you're happy. Sai, you're also happy with this.
well, I was going to ask if I'm a holy person, am I a good American? Or if I'm a good American, am I a holy person?
You could have a class about that all day long.
Well, I guess in Eisenhower's terms, yes, because Eisenhower said to be a good American, you have to, you have to be a good person and contribute to the society, coach Little League, go to church or synagogue once a week, give donations to charities, volunteer for the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, that sort of thing. So being a good American in Eisenhower's terms was the exact same thing about being a good person living in America. That you don't just live in America, you have to contribute to the society. You have to volunteer, you have to donate, you have to be involved, you have to care, you have to and you have to be religious, part of some religion, doesn't matter what religion, because in Eisenhower's terms, being part of a religious community was part of your civic involvement. So it was in some way secularizing religion and saying, it's not the religious part of the religion that's important, it's the civil part, as you see with the social action committee that we have. You don't have to believe in God to bring in some canned string beans, but the canned string beans is helping our country. Yeah, and helping people in our country. Evelyn.
Well, in a sense, Eisenhower was covering both bases, because by saying you should belong to a religious organization, he is saying that whatever ritual you follow, you are being a holy person. And therefore, if you contribute to society as a whole, but also attend your particular religion of choice, you are combining both the ritual and the moral, and so you become a holy person completely.
And the emphasis in Eisenhower's thinking, and also at the beginning of what we talked about today, is the Kedusha is something you do in a community context, not individual context. You could sit in your house and pray all day, and you can send checks to different charities all day, but that's not Kedusha, according to Harvey Fields. Kedusha is getting out there with a group and building these connections as a group. So back to the West Valley Food Bank and the Social Action Committee, you could just get in your car and bring 100 cans of string beans down to them, but it's not the same as doing it through our Social Action Committee. We're doing it collectively, and that in this context is what holiness is. We're not just giving string beans to people who need food. We're doing so as a community. and our community is one small community among the Jewish communities of America. And the Jewish communities of America are only a small part of all different kinds of communities in America. And if we all help deserving, needing people who are trying to get back on their feet, then that really builds a lot of human social capital to make this country a rich fabric of interconnecting communities, all working towards making it a good place. So that's something completely different than just getting in your car and bringing food to a needy person, which is certainly a good thing, but it's not what we're talking about here exactly. Evelyn.
No, I was just going to say that they consider most of the people in this country the quote me generation, where the self and satisfying and gratifying one's own personal needs and wants takes precedence over the benefit of contributing to the community, which was not true, let's say, before World War II, where it was critical that everyone worked for the general good, per se. Yes, they had the Ku Klux Klan, they had the German Bund. There were divisive elements in the culture itself. But when World War II occurred, Hitler invaded, and this country finally entered the war, it was a concerted effort. Everyone, man, woman, and child, contributed. We wrapped up rubber bands. We saved tin foil. We did everything we could to, quote, help the war effort. Today, our society is completely different. I don't think we could, what should I say, gel into that same fashion today. If heaven forbid that war were to occur, would we have that same patriotic fervor that was prevalent at that time? At that time, our very existence was at stake, and therefore everybody pulled together. Today, there are too many elements in our society that are thinking only of themselves, their group, and what benefits they can derive by taking advantage of someone else. And I really feel for this country, I wonder if push came to shove, would we be able to work together as a community here, a larger community, and for the country? I am very pessimistic, and that's my own personal.
And this is, and you see the same thing in Israel. And I could see this happening a long time ago. I told people when I was there 25, 30 years ago, you have to have public schools in Israel. And you have to have one school system, and the three main groups, the Orthodox, the non-Orthodox, and the Arabs, all have to go to the same public schools. And people there said that's ridiculous and that would never fly here. But by allowing each of these three groups to basically live separately, they were reinforcing their views. So now you end up with the two big groups are the non-Orthodox and the Orthodox. Over 75 years of Israel, they've become more and more different, and they have no values in common, so things have gotten more and more polarized there, even more than here. But I think you're seeing that in a lot of countries, increased polarization. And that's very dangerous, and that's very contrary to the idea of one community working toward Kedusha. Riva.
Yeah, I think we've been talking about the dynamic tension between these two elements, or you could say it's competing priorities between ethical and spiritual dimensions. And you've offered kind of a third view, and that is a blending of both of these elements, sort of an optimal blending of both dimensions. And I think that's very useful and very interesting.
Thank you. And I just want to add that I think that we just have to figure out how to get Casper the Ghost onto the good part of the list. Lori.
So, I mean, I think it's important to be morally good, of course. And I think it's also important to heed the commandments. I think that it is the combination of both those that really is a good starting point for living a Torah life. If you're morally good, if you're heeding the commandments, if you're doing what is right and good in God's eyes, I think that that's a really good starting place. And, you know, I think, Bernie, it was you that said, what does this have to do with being close to God? Is that what you had asked?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay. So I think that, you know, in any ethical faith, good is rewarded and right is rewarded and wrong is punished. So in Judaism, we're taught that obedience to the will of God was rewarded and disobedience is punished. So you have to find your path in the Torah. You have to, you know, you do, you know, a mitzvah here, a commandment here, you know, love your neighbor, you're kind to your neighbor. That leads to another thing. I think it's about working up to the goal of just bringing more into your life, you know, different mitzvot, different practices, different observances, and then all these things lead us to being nearer to God. So I think it makes perfect sense. I liked this class. I thought that it was important to discuss because I asked myself before class, you know, have I ever really sat down and thought, what exactly does that mean to me? I mean, I know what it means to feel holy when I'm doing certain things, but what does it mean? What are the basic components of it? I never really unpacked it all in this way. So I really enjoyed this. I know I go on rants sometimes, but this was really important.
Final comments. We've got 4 minutes. Marcia,
Well,
Sai, Lorraine, Marcia.
I've always, the thing that bothers me a little bit in this is I've had this discussion with Rabbi Moss and I never could get it justified in my mind. People who are good, well, let's say 95% of the time, it's really hard to be a good person 100%. God is this is a good thing in God's eyes, supposedly. Those who are redeemed from being bad are even more honored, and I don't understand that portion of it. If you're a bad person who finds redemption and changes your ways to becoming a good person and renounces your bad actions, etc., or tries to make amends for them as per maybe major changes at high holidays or something like that, you are supposedly more holy than those who are good all the time. And I don't understand that. And so I don't know what the rabbi views of those things are, but it just has always struck me as strange,
I won't address that right this moment, but
Some other time,
perhaps
maybe, huh? Okay.
Lorraine. No. Minya, Steve, Shirley, anyone? Bernie? Riva?
I'd like to say something to Evelyn if I can, because she talked a lot about how it used to be, and people would unify and they would come to the aid for a good cause, and you could see that really clearly. I think a lot of that is still going on, but I think unfortunately social media and 24-hour news and 24-hour updates and podcasts, I think we're just so clouded with so many different bits of information that it's just hard to maybe notice those really triumphant things, those really important things, those groups that are really out there doing good, because there's a lot of chatter going on in the background with all this other stuff. So I think we just have to train our minds to look more closely at the good and try to, not let the stone gather moss, of these other groups with their agendas that are, not helping, that are divisive, that are, not contributing to society in a positive way like we used to see. I think there's a lot going on, a lot of things competing for our attention. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that goodness gets buried in all that chatter.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. May I comment? Remember once hearing about someone asked the reporter, why are they always reporting murders, rapes, robberies, train crashes, etc.? And the reporter said, if we report that somebody rescued 10 kittens who fell down a sewer, what kind of news is that? But if we report that so-and-so robbed a bank and stole $10 million, now that's news, and therefore that's worth putting in. So that's why we get the kind of news that we do. It has to be newsworthy.
Okay, back to you, Steve. And we now know we have to work together to achieve Kedusha.
Steve, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Let us conclude with the blessing, and then for you, Rabbi, I know you have a few announcements, as do I. So let us conclude together. Baruch
Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'hayei olam natan b'tohenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Blessed is Adonai our
God, ruler of the universe, who has given us the teaching of truth, implanting within us eternal life.
Blessed is Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. Rabbi, I'll let you start first with your announcements. I'll conclude.
There's a new course on Monday mornings in person, starting, I guess, this coming week, controversial issues in Judaism. And you can help pick the topics. And our humor course ended this past week. It was very, very nice. And most of it was pretty funny, actually.
When does this new class meet?
It meets at the temple, 10 a.m. on Monday for 4 weeks, 10 to 11 every week for 4 weeks. It's only in person. And that is the only announcement I can think of right now.
Okay.
So thank you.
A couple of things happening at the temple also. May 5th is a free pizza party. We're honoring the members. It's at 5:30. Please bring a dessert to share. May 7th is the temple's Mother's Day brunch. It starts at 10:30, $18 per person. And Larry's ukulele ladies will be entertaining us. So get your hula going.
They're always fun.
It's a lot of fun. The can-do item for the month is canned meats or fish. And the following month is going to be toothpaste and toothbrushes. We've gotten a lot of requests for that. So hygiene is important. So that's all I got.
Did I miss the group get together between Reform synagogues, Rabbi?
I'm sorry?
Was there a group get together between Reform synagogues recently that you participated in that I missed?
With all the Reform synagogues in Phoenix?
Yeah, did I miss a get together?
I don't believe there is such a thing. You know,
Were you participating in like a Yom HaShoah thing that I missed maybe?
oh, there was something. I don't know.
Okay, is your synagogue participating in any of these upcoming events in the near future?
Ask that again.
Is your synagogue participating in any of these Reform synagogue group get-togethers that you know of?
I'm not aware of any Reform group get-togethers. If you know of it, please email me.
Okay.
I have tried to, build some connections with some of the other Reform synagogues, not too successfully.
Okay.
But I'd love to get us more involved in the broader Reform community. As far as I'm aware, there is no Reform activities across Phoenix.
Yeah, sometimes you get together for Yizkor on holidays, and I didn't know if the temple in your area participated in any of those.
We don't participate, because I don't think we know about it.
Okay,
Probably all on the east side.
yeah,
Well,
probably.
that would be okay, but they didn't invite us. So,
Yeah,
They never
Right.
invite us.
Yeah, we're all.
I'd like to meet you all in person, so it would be nice if there was, an opportunity, but I suppose I could just come to shul one Saturday. Oh, you do services on Friday night though, right?
we have every Friday at 7, and we do one Saturday morning in a private home, a guitar service, third Saturday of a month.
Oh, okay. All right.
okay. I-
Good to
Okay.
know.
Okay, I have to go.
Everyone, have a great rest of the week.
Yeah,
And, we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you for
Okay.
class.
Thank you.
Bye-bye all.